A repository has its own metamodel, which is composed of a set of architectural pieces. These pieces, in Atlas, are called classes. These elements are related to each other to compose the metamodel. Each class is made up of a set of properties. And these properties are made of a base type. What is a property base type? It is the value type that the property accepts. This base types can be a text value, a numeric value, a Boolean value, a date, a hyperlink, or a relation to another class. These relationships between classes are what create our metamodel. Here we have two classes, actor class and system class, with their own properties. Each property has a base type. The actor class has the name property, of type text, phone number, of type numeric, managers actor of type managers, and managers system of type managers as well. The base type managers is a relational type that is configured in the metamodel. That is, if a property is a relation to a class, its base type can be configured in the metamodel in addition to the default base types such as text, numeric values, dates, and so on. Relationship base types always have an inverse name. The inverse name of managers is managed by. Thus, the first actor points to the second actor, by the property managers actor and the base type managers. But the second actor has an indirect relationship to the first actor, with the base type managed by. The same thing for the relationship between actor and the system. Although the system does not have any properties that point to an actor, it has an indirect relationship, with the base type managed by. We are going to create a simple metamodel consisting of three classes. The country class, the city class, and the president class. A country has cities. And a president has a country. Classes are created in the Data Explorer menu, by clicking the plus button above the class grid. When creating a class, we can fill several fields. The name identifies the class and is required to be unique. The label is the displayed name of the class. The user can define a domain and a category to group classes. The description is the meaning of the class. And the profile is the list of user profiles to whom the class is visible. Now, let's create the country class with some properties of different base types. Let's assign a symbol. A numeric property. A datetime property. A hyperlink property. And a relational property. The cities property relates the country class to the city class. Relational properties have base types configured in Atlas. In this case, we use base type aggregates, but we could create a new relational base type. We will create the last class of our metamodel. The president class has a relational property, with the base type managers, that points to the country class. And one more thing. When creating a class, properties can be created individually, as we did earlier, or they can be inherited from another class. For this, the last has to be defined as a template class. This comes in handy when we have sets of properties that make sense to be in more than one class. Let me show you how to make a template class. Class's template option must be checked. Then, we create the properties that will be inherited and click on the Save button. Next, we edit the classes that will inherit the properties of the template class, and in the Select Property Templates option, we choose the template class that we created. If we created more properties in the template class, and wanted those properties to spread to all classes that are inheriting them, we would have to click on the Publish button after making the changes. Now that our classes are created, we can add some objects by clicking on the plus button above the Objects grid. Let's start by adding the country Portugal. We can fill in the properties that we have just created in the country class. When we fill in a relational property, we can choose an existing object from the target class's object list, or we can create new objects. In this case, when filling in the city's property that points to the city class, we are creating the objects Lisbon and Porto. After clicking the Save button, when we open the Relationships tab, we see all the objects that our object points to. In this case, Lisbon and Porto, with the aggregates relation. In the Complementary Relationships tab, we see all objects that point to our object. Now that we have a country and some cities created, we still need to have the president related to the country. Here are our newly created classes and objects. Now, let's create a very simple blueprint. Blueprints are created in the Blueprint Explorer menu by clicking on the plus button. Just like when we created a class, we can fill in the name, label, domain, category, description and the list of user profiles to whom the blueprint is visible. The representation part field has a list of the type of representations we can create, such as BPMNs, Gantt charts, bubble dashboards, and so on. Since we want to create a standard blueprint, we don't have to choose any options from this pick list. When a blueprint is opened, it can require parameter. A parameter selection allows the user to select the objects that will be the basis of the representation generation. Our first blueprint will have a country class object as a parameter, so when opening the blueprint, we will have to choose a country first, to generate the blueprint. To start editing the blueprint, we click on the Open Designer button. This is the blueprint editing canvas. To be able to see the result of our first blueprint, let's open it in a new tab, by going to the Blueprint Explorer, and clicking on our first blueprint. Now, going back to Drawing Canvas. On the left we have two menus. Query Specification, to draw queries. And Blueprint Specification, to draw containers and relate them with connectors. A blueprint consists of a set of containers, each of which can take a set of objects to be populated. Dragging the container symbol opens the container editor which is used to define the container. The field name is the name of the container and will appear on the blueprint. The weight is the number of the maximum horizontal elements inside the container. For our first blueprint, we're going to draw one container, with 3 containers inside. Containers can be populated with objects. As this blueprint receives an argument, the argument, which is a country, will appear in the first container. Let's save this and see how the result looks. All good. Now, going back to the drawing canvas. To show cities we have to make a query. The query starts with argument 1. Then, it follows the city's property, and a set of objects is returned. These objects will be stored in variable 1. We also have to make a query to show the president. This query also starts with argument 1. As the country class has no property that points to the president, we have to follow an inverse relation. So, we started with argument 1, the country, and followed the managed by relation to obtain the president as a result. Then, we store the result in variable 2. Now that we have our variables defined, we can populate the containers with them. Save the result, and see how the blueprint looks. Excellent. This is the end result. If we populate the repository with more data, the blueprint will be automatically updated. Let's create a form that allows us to create more cities and relate them to a country. Forms are views where users can view or edit information of the architecture without having to know the existing connections of the architectural elements. Thus, any person can be a possible candidate to fill in data about the data of the repository in question. Forms are created in the Form Explorer menu. To start in the simplest editing mode, we open the form and activate the edit mode by clicking on the lock button. The entry label is the text that appears in the generated form entry. The entry ID is the unique identifier of the form entry. It's automatically generated, but it is possible to change it. The entry class is the class of the form entry subject. The entry property is the property that should be filled on the form entry subject. Query is the form entry query that populates the possible values of the property of the form entry subject. The default value is the value which the form entry is initialized if the property is empty. Update mode is the mode which the form entry property value will be consolidated into the repository. Finally, we also have several flags such as visible, required, read-only and so on. In our form, the first entry is a country. We fill in the label, the class, and property. The second entry will populate the city's property of the first entry. We converted the second entry to a grid, to be able to add multiple cities. We click on the lock button again, and we can use the form to add more data. If we open the first blueprint again, it was automatically updated with the new data for the country Portugal. Thanks for watching.